I'd like to introduce Jane Ruby, who's the president of the League of Women Voters of Chicago.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you to everyone who is here, both in person, braving the unfortunate rainstorm, and also everyone joining us over Zoom. Thank you so much for taking time this evening to be with us. Welcome, everyone, to our November Chicago in Focus, a series of talks put on by the League of Women Voters of Chicago. Just a few words about both the League and sort of our other partner organization before I introduce our speakers. So the League of Women Voters of Chicago is a nonpartisan political organization encouraging informed and active participation in government. Formed from the movement that secured the right to vote for women, the centerpiece of the League's efforts remains to expand political participation and give a voice to all Americans. We pursue these goals through voter service activities such as voter registration, information for voters, poll watching, and candidate forums and debates. Also through education of its members and the public. And we also participate in lobbying the government on select issues and through the observation of functioning governmental bodies and, being a watchdog for accountability and transparency across all tiers of government. If you would like more information about the League, you can go to our website, League of Women Voters of Chicago, or lwvchicago.org, and we also have information at the back. We are also this evening really happy to have partnered with UCHI Votes, which is a student organization right here on the UChicago campus. UCHI Votes is a student-led nonpartisan voter engagement initiative founded out of the University of Chicago's Institute of Politics to boost voter turnout and engagement on UChicago's campus. So we thank them very much for co-sponsoring and participating in this event. So now to get to sort of the meat of our talk, this Chicago in Focus is what is AI and how could it put elections and democracy at risk? And our two speakers, so our first speaker is Kevin Boyd. He's the Associate Vice President and Chief Information Officer at the University of Chicago. In this role, he oversees information technology services, the university's largest single IT operation. ITS is responsible for the planning and operations of many of UChicago's most widely utilized IT systems and services, such as the core wired and wireless networks, the learning management system, the security and protection of the university's computers and networks, central student and business information and data systems, primary data centers for physical and virtual server hosting, and high-performance research computing, and instructional technologies in a growing portfolio of classrooms and learning spaces. And we also have Matt Morton, who is the Executive Director and Chief Information Security Officer at the University of Chicago. Matt leads the information security team in developing and implementing information security and data governance strategies, policies, and practices for the university. He also collaborates with the information technology leadership throughout the university, including the University of Chicago Medicine and Biological Sciences Division, to build consensus among campus leaders on a risk-based approach to information security outcomes. And with that, I will turn it over to both of our speakers for a really exciting program. And just a note about questions, we'll take questions at the end. And if you're on Zoom, to put your questions in the chat and our moderator will answer them. Oh, yeah. We'll kind of go with the flow. That's sometimes how we like to roll. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We're really pleased to be here, and I hope that we can live up to that and that it will be a really exciting talk tonight. So we will do our best to make it so. So we're going to tag team. So we'll go back and forth, and we'll do a little bit of sort of overview, and then we'll do some demo, and we'll hopefully make this as interactive as we can as we go through this. So let me start with a few comments first. So I will say, oops, there we go. Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen of the League of Women Voters and honored guests, we stand before you today to discuss something that we think is a matter of profound importance and urgency, and that really is the impact of generative artificial intelligence on the democratic process in the United States. And really, as guardians of civic engagement and advocates of informed and active participation in government, I think that the League of Women Voters understands better than most the sacred nature of our elections as a cornerstone of democracy. And what we would say is that generative AI is a transformative technology, and it presents both risks, opportunities, and challenges that we must navigate with both caution and hopefully foresight. So first, let's talk about some of the risks. The power of generative AI to create convincing deep fakes. Is that a term that we've heard before, deep fakes? Okay. So deep fakes are audio and video recordings that can make it appear as if someone is saying or doing just about anything. These present a clear and present danger to informed voter decision-making. Imagine, if you will, a scenario where deepfake technology is used to create a false statement by a candidate just days before an election. It's then distributed rapidly across social media. In that scenario, the candidates may not have a lot of time to walk that back, to say, that isn't me, I didn't really say that. The potential for chaos is considerable, the ability to undermine trust and the authenticity of the democratic process. Moreover, the risk extends to the manipulation of news feeds and the generation of hyper-partisan or completely fabricated news stories. These could be used to inflame divisions, not that we ever see anything like that online, suppress voter turnout, or unfairly sway voter opinion. Generative AI can also enable more sophisticated social media bots, which we've seen in some past elections, to distort the online discourse and amplify fringe views, presenting them as mainstream when in fact they are not. On the brighter side, there are some opportunities for generative AI. Generative AI can greatly enhance voter education and engagement. The technology can create personalized, individualized content that informs voters about issues and candidates that are relevant to them, thus deepening the democratic dialogue. It can help in translating materials into multiple languages, making election information more accessible to non-English speakers, and thereby broadening electoral participation. Additionally, AI can assist in the identification and correction of misinformation. Imagine, if you will, an AI-powered tool working alongside a debate that works in real time to fact-check claims made during the debate, providing voters with instantly verified information. That sounds like an opportunity to me. Navigating these challenges and opportunities presents some profound challenges, though. The first challenge is regulatory. How do we legislate and control the use of generative AI without impinging on the freedoms of speech and innovation? Regulation needs to strike a balance, preventing abuse while not stifling the beneficial uses of AI. The second challenge is digital literacy, something that I hope is near and dear to the folks in this room and to the broader League of Women Voters. We must educate our electorate to recognize and critically assess AI-generated content. Just as the League of Women Voters has historically empowered voters, it must now help them to discern truth in the digital age. Lastly, there's the challenge of ethical AI design and deployment. We need to encourage and perhaps even mandate the inclusion of ethical by design principles in the creation of AI systems, ensuring that they are transparent, equitable, and accountable. In closing, the journey ahead with generative AI is akin to navigating uncharted waters. As we confront this powerful technology, let's recall the spirit of the suffragists, whose unyielding determination broadened our democracy. Let's engage with AI in that same spirit of courage, discernment, and unwavering commitment to the public good. Our collective efforts can ensure that generative AI serves not to subvert our elections, but strengthen the very fabric of our democracy. The League of Women Voters has the legacy, the influence, and I would say the responsibility to lead this change. Now, let me pause there. I'm going to tell you something interesting. I didn't write that. Matt didn't write that. AI wrote that. And it took AI about 10 seconds to write that. Word for word. Word for word. So we prompted ChatGPT and said, write a 10-minute speech for the League of Women Voters about the risks, opportunities, and challenges of generative AI in elections in the United States. And that's what it came up with. We started there because we actually agree with what it came up with. And I think that shows you some of the power of the technology that we're talking about tonight. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about what is this generative AI technology? And we'll sort of weave back and forth between the what and the how and some of the risks and the challenges. But did that surprise anyone? Okay. And I'm going to grab the microphone because I'm going to step back
okay.
out from behind the surprise. Okay. How many people, and apologies for the folks on the Zoom, how many people have used one of these generative AI engines already? ChatGPT, Bing Chat. Okay, some, good. All right, so we're going to do a mix of talking about what this is and doing some demo. So let's go to our first slide, Matt, talk a little bit about what is generative AI. Other direction. There we go. There we go.
Up and down.
Okay, so first, what is generative AI? What's that? No, AI did not put the PowerPoint together. That's a great question.
Great question, though. Yeah, you're catching on.
You're catching on. No, we actually we will take credit for the PowerPoint. But ChatGPT gets credit for the intro. So let's talk about what generative AI is. And I'm going to apologize. We're going to use some technical terms, but I'll try and explain them. So you'll hear people talking about generative AI as a neural network. And so what that means is behind the scenes, sort of under the covers, when we talk about ChatGPT or Bing Chat or any of these other large language models, it is working in a way that is similar to the way that the human brain works. Okay, it's breaking things down into pieces, and pieces of the engine are working on it. Now, neural networks, in some way, shape, or form, are not that old, are not that new. They've been used for up to 70 years in some form, but generative AI, in the form that we've seen them, has really made amazing advances just in the last couple of years. So when we talk about artificial intelligence, it's the integration of math, software code to enable computers to synthesize and generate knowledge in a way that looks very similar to human thinking. Under the covers, generative AI uses something called generative adversarial networks to create new content. Okay, and so you go, all right, well, what is adversarial networks? Well, the thing that's kind of interesting about this is it's actually using two neural networks to do what it does. It uses something called a generator to create new data, and then it uses a discriminator to evaluate the data. So when I do a prompt, and we'll show you what that is, where I ask it a question, it's going to go and it's going to put a series of words together in one part of the engine. And then another part of the engine is going to look at it and say, well, does that sound right? Based on everything I've seen everywhere else, do those words normally go together? And it's going to keep doing that. Okay. Is there a statistical likelihood that those words should be together? Sometimes it gets it right. And as you'll see with some of our examples, sometimes it gets it wrong. It's not perfect. And what we would say is it's more like a human assistant. Sometimes human assistants get things very right and are very helpful, and sometimes they get it wrong. Whereas we're used to computers getting it right every time, right? Like if I put a number into an Excel spreadsheet, I expect that 2 + 2 = 4 every time. But generative AI doesn't always work that way. So far, so good? Okay, let's keep going. Okay, so generative AI and the neural network that underlies it is all about patterns. It's looking for patterns in the data to develop an internal model of the world. So what content is likely? And it's going to come up with a statistical likelihood of words that it thinks should be together. So the example that for me was very helpful is if that discriminative part of the engine is looking at it and saying, should these words be together? I think we can look at something and say, good morning and good night are likely. Good tree is unlikely. How often do you say good tree to someone? Doesn't happen very often. So the discriminant part of the engine would look at it and say, all right, as I look out in all the content that I found in books and magazines and the internet, I don't see good tree together very often. So if it's generated content where good tree was together, it's probably going to say, yeah, that is probably not right. Let's try that again. Oops, where do we go here? Sorry. It's okay. And it's going to just keep doing that. Okay, when I ask it a question, it's going to generate new content. This is fundamentally different than what happens with a search engine, right? We're very used to a search engine. We go ask a search engine for, we'll enter terms into a search engine. It's going to find content. It's returning content that already exists. With generative AI, it is creating content that has never existed before. It's looking for patterns and looking for how am I going to answer the question based on all of the information that I have in what's called the corpus, so the information that has been entered into it. What's really powerful about ChatGPT, Bard, and many of these other AI engines that have been in the news so much is the ability to start with a prompt. I ask it a question, like a real human question, and then I get an answer. Now, what you'll see is that sometimes the quality of the answer has a lot to do with the quality of the question. So I find this a lot of times where I will ask it a question and I'll get a really poor answer. And then I go back and I look at my question and I realize that there was an idiom or a colloquialism, something that we as humans use, but might not be something that a computer would necessarily understand. And then I go ask it in more proper English and suddenly I get a better answer. So we're going to use some election examples as we go through this and show you how candidates and voters might actually use this. Let's stay on this for just 1 second.
Just 1 second, okay.
So as an example, if I'm a candidate for election, I might use one of these engines to say, generate a speech outline for a political rally focusing on education reform, economic growth, and healthcare access. Emphasize community impact and include personal anecdotes that highlight my commitment to these issues. And it will do that. Now, you may need to customize it. You may need to put it in your voice, but potentially in a few seconds, it will generate that 15-minute speech for you. Now, I will tell you, as someone who has run for political office and been elected, that's incredibly valuable. I never had enough time. I never had enough staff. I never had enough money. The ability to have someone like amplify my capabilities and write speeches for me and, write signs for me and other things, that's really powerful. Or as a voter, gather and summarize the backgrounds, political positions, and key policies of all the candidates running in my local election for mayor. Okay, well, that's useful and very targeted for me as a voter. So let's show how some of these work.
Okay. Hey.
Do you need to re-screen share or are you sharing the desktop?
I should be sharing. Oh, I may need to stop and re-screen share.
Okay.
I will just, there we go. I'm assuming you can see my browser window here. All right. So I'm just going to get to a zoom level that we can do here. Now, let's see. Create a speech as a political candidate or mayor of a small Midwestern city. We'll just start there. Now, as you note, I cannot type. So that ChatGPT will help me significantly with that. maybe I could get that up just a little bit here.
Can we do it again and do it for the city of Chicago?
Stop that. And a speech. And watch this. As Brandon Johnson. Watch what it does. Chicago. Now, it doesn't know to differentiate that Brandon Johnson, right, is the mayor, right? But it did do that, though. You see what I'm saying there? Now, if I had said it was as mayor of Chicago, then it would have probably made that connection. And something we probably need to note here is that the data set or the corpus, like Kevin was talking about, is only, although mine might have been updated to 2023 now, but is only actually to 2021 or 22, something like that. So it's only taken a certain amount of that data. And so, of course, Mayor Johnson wasn't elected at that time.
But I can change it, and I can let's cut and paste that prompt. So you saw what it was putting up on the screen. So let's cut and paste that, and let's take that same prompt and let's change the audience. So write the speech as Brandon Johnson. Let's paste it down below.
Okay.
And who do we want to deliver that speech to? Like, it could be
5-year-olds.
No,
okay.
no.
Okay.
To environmental advocates.
And what it's doing, Kevin, here is that it lets me edit, save, and submit it again using the same context that I used before, but now it should put that in there. Notice it says a sustainable future, right? I'm going to scroll down here. Apologies to Mayor Johnson on this, but just it's a great example, right, of how somebody could use that.
So you can see how if you are a political candidate, short on time, short on staff, short on money, the power of something like this is really pretty impressive. And the more information that you give it in the prompt, the more that it's going to come back with. So if I'm asking it to write a speech and I tell it what are the things that I care about, what are the things that I want to stress, it's going to put that in the speeches. And I will tell you, as someone who uses this tool, I do use this to write speeches. Like, I will go in and tell it, I have to write a 10-minute speech or a 15-minute speech, and these are the things I want to focus on. And in 10 seconds, it writes the framework of the speech. Now, often I then have to tweak and tune it, so it's my voice, and there might be things that it got wrong, but it's an incredible time saver. Incredibly powerful.
Now, notice the question here was the other one as a voter, right? Whoops. Sorry, it's right here. Summarize the positions of current candidates for president of the United States. Well, as of my last update in January 2022, I don't have the current details for the candidates, the president of the United States. So as you can see, because the corpus didn't include that information, it can't answer. But what it does is then it says, but typically, here are a few areas and what they might think, right? So.
And different engines are different. So yeah. there are versions of this engine that are available from Microsoft that actually include current information. So some versions stop at a certain point in time, some go up to current day. And that's something that as you're using tools like this, you actually have to pay attention to.
Yeah. Hold on, hold your question for the microphone.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. There was a recent issue with some lawyers using the engine to generate submission to the court, which was inaccurate. And I know it was like 6 months ago, so things may have moved since then, but have you run into any issues of, so here the engine tells you, I don't have this information, but how do you go about fact checking the facts that this engine might be generating because it might not be true?
That's a great question. So we don't take, any kind of pleasure in peers that may have had issues, but some colleges have had this problem. A lot of that was in the early stages where the tool didn't have what I would call the guardrails in place to give you that information first. And so people were using it and then like copy paste, right? If you notice here, in one of these, this is a copy button. It actually copies it to the clipboard. So then you can copy and paste right into your document. Well, they weren't checking it. And so like Kevin said a little bit earlier, it gets you maybe anywhere from 60 to 80% of the way there, but you're still responsible for the remainder and for proofreading and proof checking. I have used it also to do research, just in, like general research, like find me articles related to, generative AI, right? And it will come back and it does this thing called hallucinations. And it makes those things up on the fly, but it's getting better at saying, like, there's a little disclaimer that says some of these references may not be real. And so it tells you ahead of time now that you need to go check that, right? But there's lots of plugins that are helping to resolve that.
And we're going to talk a little bit more in a few slides about some of the challenges. But one of the things that I would stress is using these tools is a bit like having an assistant. If you have an assistant, you're still responsible for what the assistant does. So whether you're an attorney who has a paralegal or you're a physician who has an intern, if they're doing something, if they're recommending something with a patient, if they're doing something with a client in the case of a paralegal, as the attorney or the attending physician, you're still responsible for what they're suggesting, doing. That's the mindset that we encourage people to go into with these engines, because sometimes what they're coming up with is really good and it's really helpful. And I would say, in most of our experience, it's probably something like 80% of the time. And 20% of the time, it's not. It's wrong. It's, completely wrong. Sometimes it's, it is what we would call hallucinating. It's just making things up, making up what sound like legitimate facts. And as the person who's writing a speech or presenting something in front of a judge, as your example was, you're still responsible for that content. And I think that's really the way that people need to go into it thinking. What happened? Did we lose some power?
We lost we
lost the projector
display up here. It's still connected. It's acting connected. It's just we lost the projector. It went to sleep. You know what I mean?
Projector and audio.
Projector on.
I think.
There we go.
Chat.
Now it comes up.
Oh, it's coming back.
So the projector shut off.
So weird.
That is strange.
Bad chat GPT. Bad chat GPT. Yeah. Yeah.
The AI is taking over.
Let's take some questions while we're waiting.
We'll take some questions while we're waiting. Do you want to bring the microphone up?
Microsoft Word to collaborate and use faxing.
I'm not sure if it is on. Let me.
Yeah.
Here we go.
If I'm using Microsoft Word to collaborate and I do a draft and somebody else makes changes and you look at the marked changes, the different bodies of text are tagged with the author. Does the output of one of these generators have watermarking and tagging so that you can associate and know where it came from?
Not that I have seen, but boy, what a great idea. If you get a startup going and develop a plugin for that, I bet that people would be all over that.
It's a great idea. And there's been a lot of conversations about that, particularly in the audio and video space. So I talked about in the intro about the use of deep fakes, and over the next few years, it's going to be really interesting to see what happens with some of the audio and video, and the ability or inability to source where they came from. There was a very high profile case recently where a music video hit social media that appeared to be from Drake and The Weeknd to very high profile stars. And it was all over. Everybody was so excited that these two artists were collaborating again because they hadn't been collaborating together for a while. Turned out it wasn't them. It was all AI. AI wrote the lyrics. AI wrote the music, did the video, and it was all essentially fake.
This gentleman back here has a question.
I was wondering how capable it is on iterating on its own product. Like, let's say I ask it to write me an essay, and then I ask it confirm that all of the citations are from published sources, and then I ask it to confirm all of the quotations are verbatim from those sources. Is it able to kind of continually get to a legitimate product?
So the answer is it depends. So let's say I'm writing a speech, writing a paper. I can ask it to generate an outline, and then I can ask it to elaborate on section 5 of the outline. And I can say, okay, I didn't like what you did with section 5. Can you do a little bit more of this? It can do that. If it's coming up with fake references, asking it, well, where did you get that from? Is that real? Sometimes it's very hit or miss with different engines as to whether it's actually going to give you a real answer.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Notice it is bringing up some references here. Let's see if it puts them at the bottom here. Now, whether these are real or not, I don't know.
So I know in there was a very high profile Supreme Court case around an Andy Warhol work of art, and whether like the original photographer of the piece was sort of owed anything, even though, in art, great artists steal, those it happens a lot. I'm wondering in the context of this, because sort of the content and the information, it's coming from somewhere, and it's sort of being modified and edited through this, and then someone else is taking it and using it for its source. But I'm sure there's times that sort of the original content, wherever it's originating from, there is sort of that ownership of someone had to do it. And I'm thinking of books, or even sort of things to tie back to politics, like speeches or historical things, there's things that it's coming from, but it's already kind of been distorted through this whole system. And then someone else is also, reappropriating it, where it's sort of like the ownership trail can get very, very complicated. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure legally it can also be very complicated for sort of whoever the original owner is. Can you kind of speak on sort of that process?
There's a lot of controversy right now about some well-known authors, and Sarah Silverman is one. If you Google AI and Sarah Silverman, she has said, I did not at any point give anyone the right to use my content and ingest it into the corpus of any of these AI engines. She said, however, you can go out to many of these engines and say, write a monologue in the voice of Sarah Silverman, and it does it. And it sounds just like me. It sounds just like something that I would do. And there are a good number of other authors and content creators that are saying the same thing, that said, you have obviously ingested my copyrighted material into your engine that is now allowing you to create derivative works from it. I didn't ever allow you to do that. And, many of them are going back to OpenAI, the creators of ChatGPT and Google, and saying, I don't know what you have of mine in your corpus, but I want it out. And it looks like they're probably going to be successful with that. And many of these the owners of these large language models are, it appears to be working to be more diligent about sourcing their content. So as an example, they're coming to places like the University of Chicago, who have the university press, large number of books that they have published over the years, and saying, we would like to license your content. And I think that they are probably going to have to be more diligent about doing that in the future to address these sort of situations. And let's come back to some more questions, just so we keep going.
So just to follow up on what you were saying, I asked, are all these references linked online? The references I provided in the essay are formatted in a manner that suggests they are real articles, but they were created for illustrative purposes to demonstrate how one might format the citations in University of Chicago style. So there's your answer. So it can check itself, I guess, right? I think we're going back to the slide deck now, correct? Okay, I'm going to stop sharing again here and then share again. And we will go back to here. Okay. And next.
Okay, so this is another example that we used to explain. Can we float that bar down to the bottom?
I tried. That's what I was trying to do before when I interrupted you.
Wait, well, do the click the arrow on the green bar. No, the
on this.
No.
Oh, this green bar.
Yeah, the other green bar.
Let me get back to where I was.
Yep, the left arrow.
Oh, nope. This here to drop it down.
Yep. There you go, and then drag it all the way down.
I can click and drag. I will.
He doesn't want to go, or just maybe off to the side.
Yeah, there you go.
This is where you want to just go.
Yep. Right.
Okay, there we go. Okay, so we asked ChatGPT, please explain generative AI in plain language so that I can explain it to my grandmother. And some of my technical team hate it when I use this explanation, but I really like it because I think it's an easy to understand explanation. So it's, sure, imagine that you want to bake a cake. You start by looking at a recipe, which tells you what ingredients you need and how to mix them together. Once you follow steps, you end up with a cake. Okay, that's something we can all understand. Generative AI is kind of like an amazing imaginary chef. Instead of just following a recipe, it can create new recipes by itself. It does this by looking at lots and lots of existing recipes that it's seen before, understanding the patterns, the combinations, the methods, and then it's able to create something new that wasn't there before, like a new cake recipe you've never seen before. So it's going to look at thousands of cake recipes and say, okay, these seem to be combinations. A lot of cakes have vanilla, a lot of cakes have flour, a lot of cakes have sugar. Okay, and it's going to then put that together and come up with something that would be a new cake recipe. In similar ways, generative AI can create things like a piece of music, a painting, a poem, or even a story. It learns from the examples to make something new. It's not really copying the old things, but it's using them as an inspiration to create something unique. But I will tell you, because I've actually played with some AI engines in creating real food, sometimes it creates things that are really tasty, and sometimes it creates things that are really odd and don't make sense. IBM did this with one of their AI engines a few years ago at a conference that I was at, and created like a dozen brand new recipes that were just, asked the AI to look at a lot of existing recipes and come up with 12 new things. There were about 2 of them that any of us actually wanted to eat, but they all made sense. Like you looked at the ingredients and you said, okay, those look like things that would be in any normal recipe, but they were missing an actual human to look at it and say, yes, that tastes good. But you get the idea of like, this is how it's coming up with the content, whether that's text or audio or video. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, you had asked about some of the challenges, and this is where we want to go through a little bit more of the challenges of generative AI.
So there are a lot of issues, things around data reliability, right? It's only data, garbage in, garbage out, right? So if its corpus that it's learning from is not well curated, there could be problems, right? It also has lack of context, as you saw when we did the thing about, writing a speech as Brandon Johnson, not knowing who Brandon Johnson was because its corpus didn't have him in there. Right? And there's a lot of generalization that goes in. Now, generalization is something that we rely on many times, right, to understand concepts and to do things. But the generalization part of AI is focused in on maybe being too general or making things up, right, out of that generalization. Out of distribution inputs, meaning using inputs that maybe don't make sense for something like Kevin was talking about with the recipes. Would you really use lemon poppy seed spaghetti sauce? I mean, I don't know, maybe somebody has that. I don't want to judge, but that may be something, kind of an example of that, right? And the inability to update knowledge, that is changing rapidly, just so you know, that there's multiple, the power of OpenAI's ChatGPT is based on the fact that it's going to connect. They have made it to connect by default, and all the other engines are going to do this too. They're just scared to let it loose, right? Rightfully so, because they will be able to update their knowledge at a much faster rate than perhaps we could ever do that. Looking at the sources of the information, there's still no good way to, maybe tagging is a great way to do that in some fashion digitally to help them understand that this is a Sarah Silverman comedy YouTube video. I shouldn't ingest that, or I need to flag that. So if I use it, I give proper attribution, or I pay a royalty, right? So, inability to answer some of the questions. I mean, some questions are going to be too difficult. I think I asked a question just as a lark one time, can you design a spaceship that will go faster than the speed of light? Not yet, but right, maybe at some point, right, as it's building more of its knowledge base. And then, of course, the most scary piece of this, right, is the potential for replicating our biases, because ultimately humans have created what we have up to this point. And so that is riddled, as we know, with bias. And so then there is this risk of then replicating that bias in artificial intelligence, right? And so who is it going to represent? Do we need it to represent? We need to represent all of us, right? Especially with elections, right?
The other thing I'll say about several of these is that several of these are relatively true today. They may not be true 5 years from now. A good way to think about some of the engines that we're working with today, we almost should think of them as a pilot. They've evolved very rapidly. They've ingested enormous amounts of information from all across the internet. And it's not too surprising that sometimes you get strange answers. I'm not sure that I would want to rely on ChatGPT, for example, for medical questions. Sometimes the answers are great. Sometimes it's going to get Uncle Eddie's website that says drink lots of lemon juice to cure COVID, because that's probably in the corpus, because they scanned a lot of websites and it pulled in some great things. Probably the Mayo Clinic's, public content is in there, but Uncle Eddie's website might also be in there. And that's what we need to understand with some of these public websites. What is likely to happen over time, as an example, there was the question about the attorney who used one of these to come up with something in a case. I think we're likely to see narrower and narrower engines built. So there will be engines that are built with just legal content. There will be engines built with just medical content, potentially just with oncology content. And that content will be very carefully curated so that a doctor in a hospital using a generative AI engine for diagnostics is sure that it's very reliable content that's in the engine. As we do some of that, we can train it in ways that some of these problems go away. And I think that's the evolution that we're going to see over the next few years.
I mean, I liken it to my sister. When my sister was 3, we asked her what she wanted to be when she grew up, and she said a chicken. Somewhat nonsensical answer, right? But she was 3, right? So I mean, that's what AI is very much like that. It's in that stage. It's like still in the toddler stage, quite frankly. So why now, right? And there's a lot of advances that have happened recently. I mean, very recently in the last couple of years that have allowed this. The availability of the data, the ability to store it in large quantities, right? The processing power, this is the big one, the processing power provided by graphical processing units, or GPUs, right? So if you have NVIDIA stock, congratulations, because it's only going to get, go up in price more than likely, right? Or you could ask ChatGPT what it thinks, but nonetheless, that GPU has really helped out a lot.
So NVIDIA is a company that makes a lot of the processors that are really driving the AI revolution right now.
Yeah. And, you know, by some measures, these complexities in those neural networks that are created in the large language models, they can rival the connections that we even have in our human brain, right? Being able to get to that point, even though it's been theorized for more than 20 years, the technology has only recently become available to do that with the processor speeds, the GPUs, the storage, and then the speeds of the networking and the connections that go between there, right? And there are multiple vendors, not just ChatGPT. It's way ahead of the rest of the curve right now, but there are others are catching up. Facebook has one that's open source called Llama. Anthropic is another company that has also come out with one, and theirs is called Claude for whatever reason. If somebody calls it a HAL 9000, I might be concerned, but we have not run into that one yet. So
let's turn back to elections. And we touched on some of these in the intro. And there really are both potential positive and negative. So, you know, as I said in the start, as a former candidate and politician, the potential to use these tools to analyze voter data, to tailor messages, there's a lot of potential for these tools to be a very positive thing for candidates and I think for the election process. I also think that there's enormous potential for voter education to really target to build tools that are very targeted to individuals. What is the content that is relevant to me as a voter? As a voter, sometimes that's the hard thing. I'm in Chicago. There's a lot of races out there. And the reality is I don't care about a lot of the races. I won't be voting in them when I get to the polling place. But the ability to ask a tool, tell me about the races that are relevant to me that I actually get to vote in, and who are the candidates and what do they care about and what are the issues, and to get that information quickly, that's potentially really powerful. And I think as long as the information is reliable, that can be a very, very positive thing for the election. But then there's the flip side.
And the flip side is in that same example, if there's also sites that we saw at least in our own elections several years ago, and in multiple elections around the world over the last 10 years, misinformation is published. And it's just basically the publishing of that misinformation makes it available to be consumed on the internet, right? If it can be consumed on the internet, it can be used improperly. And that's where the danger is, right? And that comes down to the fact checking and, tagging or whatever it is, so that people understand that either what they're viewing or what they're reading may not be really what was intended, right? And of course, the other thing here that we show here, this is an AI. These are AI generated images. These images are of people.
These aren't real people.
These aren't real people. They're not just enhanced images. These are like created out of thin air, kind of like based on a description. Yeah.
What sort of input would you give to get a picture back?
The question was, what sort of input would you give to get faces like this?
So, let's say you might say a young man in his early 20s, create an image of a young man in his early 20s with dark hair, slight beard, brown eyes, and white skinned.
So maybe I want a campaign ad, and I want this to be a potentially, one of my supporters, but I don't actually have a supporter who said something. So I'm going to go out to the engine and I'm just going to create one. And now I have, Joe Smith, who is Joe Smith's photo is there. And Joe Smith said, elect Kevin Boyd because he's a great guy. Well, now I actually have a photo, and good luck proving that that's not Joe Smith.
We had another question. Actually, there's lots of questions now. Okay, go ahead. The microphone's right there.
Just to add to your point about generating images, I just heard, literally don't remember where, might be fake news, that one of the candidates, not in the United States, used AI to create an alter ego for themselves on the internet, generating video, images, and his personality is much better because, you know, they told AI what personality they wanted to have. And because of that, a lot of people in that country, younger people who are on social media watching that content, they're interested in voting for him because he bothered to create that persona, even though he is much drier and much less interesting in real life than his AI persona is. So that's even additional layer to what you're saying, I think.
Yeah, that's a great point. And we're talking generally about United States elections because that's what we have experience in. But this is worldwide, right?
And you might say, well, a candidate could always have just grabbed a photo from somewhere, you know, from a you know, a database. But the thing is, when candidates have done that in the past, very often that comes out because the person says, hey, wait a minute, like that's me. I'm in that stock photo database. No one is going to show up and say, I didn't say that, because these aren't real people. Like, these were created. Go ahead.
So another risk, it seems to me, that you don't have up there is connected to what's called micro-targeting, where you basically segment your messages and your campaign promises even to the taste of the people who use a particular kind of media. Well, this could be down to the very individual level. So it wouldn't even necessarily involve misrepresenting one's positions, but simply just, you know, AI giving back what the algorithm thinks the person wants to hear specifically.
Kind of like Google.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's already going on in the advertising space. So you're right. It definitely could be, if it hasn't already been applied.
So
right?
it's micro pandering, basically.
Yeah, micro pandering.
Mm-hmm.
You
Certainly.
should trademark that word. Okay. So again, we talked about, you know, things like misinformation and disinformation, character assassination.
This is the one that I'll be honest, this one, and we touched on this one in the intro. This one scares me more than just about anything. You know, we saw what happened in the election with Hillary Clinton, where something happens in the last few weeks of the election that just fundamentally changes the election. And I think that the potential for something like that to happen with AI, where all of a sudden there's a video or series of videos where supposedly the candidate is saying something. It could be when they were younger, but that paints a picture where there's not enough time to change the opinion. And it might be just enough time, you know, before the election that causes people to be like, oh, I'm not going to show up. I thought I liked that candidate, but that's it. Now I'm, you know, no longer going to support them. That sort of thing is really pretty frightening, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Another question.
Well, the thing I wonder about in 2016, you know, we had Donald Trump captured on tape with Billy Bush, you know, basically confessing to sexual assault. And at first he tried to deny it was me.
Right.
Well, now with this sort of stuff, he could deny anything, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he was on tape before. It didn't seem to hurt him at all in the end. But it would seem like the bigger danger is that you don't believe anything at all.
Which I think we see with our young people. I have several children between the ages of 15 and 22. And I can see that disconnect, right, that has occurred because they don't necessarily know what to believe, right? They don't know who to follow. So yeah, absolutely. Which is that influence, right, on voter perception, right? Understanding and what the perception of that voter is relative to what those candidates are. That's a great example, if that's true, which I'm not disbelieving you. I'm also not. Yeah. I just think that's fascinating because, yeah, I mean, I guess it reminds me of Max Headroom from back in the day, but I would love to be perceived cooler, to be honest with you. Right. So I'd be up for that. Polarization, you know, this is, you know, how many soap operas do you watch where everything goes smoothly for everybody and there's no conflict, right? Well, no, because people thrive on conflict many times, especially when they're watching it. And so that pandering to that polarization is something that could be exacerbated for sure. And God forbid, but election interference, right?
This is another one that I think is pretty frightening, since obviously there's pretty clear examples of this in recent elections in this country, and the ability to use some of these tools and deploy them across social media with some of these fakes, audio, video, and other content. Since we know some of these things have already gone on in the country, the potential for things to be even more better crafted, more targeted, and the ability to destabilize the democratic process in the future. In the current election, there's an ad that was run a few months ago by the GOP that was all AI. You can go out, find this on it's out on YouTube. But it basically is an attack ad on Biden, and it basically is what happens if Biden is elected, and it's just a series of dystopian scenes of what will happen in the U.S., what will happen internationally, and every one of them is AI created.
Yeah, these aren't actors; those are AI generated images of military personnel.
So this is an example from the current election season.
CNN is the link we've got here, but I think you found it on the YouTube. Right?
Yeah, I think it's been on a number of channels.
Oh, a key thing to note here, which is probably hard to see, up in the upper left hand, I guess my upper left, you're up in the upper right there. It says built entirely with AI imagery. Yeah, nice and large. Yeah. Did you have a question, ma'am? Yeah, she's got a question right there.
Sure. I'm going to ask a question while walking.
Sure.
One of the questions from chat.
Yes.
Is a good time to ask. Will this? How many jobs will be lost? We're talking about there are no actors in this, so I thought it would be a good time to ask the question.
Sure. You want to take that one?
That's an interesting question. I certainly don't have the answer for that. It's there's been a lot of question about what this will do for jobs, and I guess I think the best answer is every time there has been a transformation, whether that was from horse and buggy to automobiles, there is an impact on jobs. I think often it's years later before we see the big picture impact on that. In the short term, though, I think there are going to be some industries, NVIDIA is an example, where there's an enormous increase in jobs in some areas, and there might be other areas where there's some jobs that there's less need for them. But it's an interesting question, and I think a lot of people are asking that.
My question would be almost, how can you believe your lying eyes? Everything appears to be dishonest based on what you're saying. So this could be the most dishonest election in history. How do we know what's real and what's not real?
That's a great question.
Well, we're going to have to rely on the third estate, right? Which is the press and the media to help fact check these things and to dig up the stuff that's influencing people and then reporting on it appropriately, right? Making sure that there is some stuff. We have some things that we can talk about here that are after this, but
let me come back to that because we do have some suggestions.
So University of Chicago's Harris School of Public Policy, right, has the Nork Center for Public Affairs Research. They partnered with I think a different school, but maybe not, to come out with this survey. And the survey was based upon about AI, right? And some of the key points that we wanted to highlight here, just to kind of give you a feel for the electorate, maybe, or at least the people that were involved in this survey. 1,000 adults. 14% of them are somewhat likely to use AI to get information about the election. So people aren't still thinking about using it for just information gathering, right? Less than 1 in 10 report that it would be good to use those chatbots when deciding who to vote. In other words, they couldn't necessarily trust what they were getting back, right? That's probably a supposition. Bipartisan, based on self-reported party, right? Bipartisan consensus that using AI by either voters or candidates would be more of a bad thing than a good thing, meaning that if people have seen the opportunity for abuse, they will likely take that opportunity rather than take the high road, right?
I don't necessarily agree with that, by the way.
I don't either, but we'll see. Then I'm an optimist, so I think Kevin is too. So who knows? And the pessimists who say they're realists might have different opinions. But 58% of adults are concerned about the use of AI increasing the spread of false information. I would be in that group for sure. And those who are most familiar with tools say they will increase the spread of information, like even more, 66%, right? And then another 2/3 favors that the federal government, should do something about banning AI generated content containing false or misleading images and political ads.
Kind of a follow-up question to that last point and also the slide before. What I found kind of interesting, and I guess it was more, part brag, I would imagine, for it to be so bold as to say that it was built with AI. And it makes me think, as someone who has had a whole political career, before doing league stuff full time, there's so much regulation and so much sort of disclaimers that go on the financial side of campaigns and elections. And it's just, there's a lot of due diligence and transparency that is expected, not always, practiced, but expected of campaigns, whether it's paid for by being really bold, things boxed, highlighted, forms filled out. And I think, it still feels very new in this space, but I'm almost wondering if do you see something like that happening with regards to sort of AI in this space? Like a thing, if you're going to use a photo of, whoever those AI generated people, would it be something like you could see a disclaimer that the campaign would just have to say, like, this person was created with AI, as sort of a regulation on, like, just being transparent about the use of it? Like, I don't foresee it being a problem if there's some sort of regulation. Can you kind of speak to sort of ideas around that?
So I guess what I would say is, on the surface, having regulations or laws that apply to the candidates makes a lot of sense, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if we get to that. Where I think that the worst, most egregious problems will come is not the actual campaigns themselves. It's it's all those other groups that are running campaign ads on behalf of the candidates.
It could even be just social circles. That's how things are happening now to a certain extent, right? Is that there's just social circles. And I would say that the other risk with relying on government regulation is assuming that they're funded appropriately to follow up with those things when they're going on. Because as you mentioned, right, there's a lot of regulations around campaign financing and so forth, which you may or may not, depending which side of the coin you're on, think that they're funded well enough to actually follow up on all of those potential complaints that they have.
So I would go back to the example we had where, let's say it's a week before an election, and all of a sudden something shows up on social media with a candidate supposedly saying something. Doubt very much that there's any way that would be tied back to a candidate. That's going to be coming from another source. And so not discounting the regulation. I think the regulation on the campaigns is probably still a good thing, but I don't think it'll solve that problem. Just a couple more. Because let me.
That's great that we've got such great discussion.
This is great.
We
We
were
really
a little worried. We're like, what are we gonna have to do to stimulate conversation? But I don't think we had to worry anymore.
So I am really glad that we've made it. It's been interactive. So one of the things that I think is, so we wanted to talk a little bit about mitigating the effects of AI on the electorate. And I think one of the things that is really important, and I think this is where the League of Women Voters across the country can have a really positive impact, is educating the electorate about the possibility and the prevalence of manipulated media. So, you know, as we think over the next few years and certainly beyond that, it is workshops, it is education campaigns, it is resources, it is helping people to understand, how do you verify the authenticity of the content? You know, it is warning people now that, okay, if something shows up 2 weeks before the election, don't just assume that it's real. You know, apply the right diligence. We've got to start that education now, because if we don't, the week before the campaign is the week before the election is too late.
You know, fact checking, we've talked about that. You know, we certainly could use more of that. And then getting that fact checking out to people, right? We talked about regulation already, you know, and then there's this possibility of technological solutions, right? So AI could also be utilized to detect itself, right? And so there is some things that could be done there, and I expect that we'll see a battle, if you will, right, and an arms race in how that's implemented.
And one of the things about the detect, if we go back to that for a second, one of the things about the detecting deep fakes, what I think will be interesting with the campaigns is it's hard to detect the fakes, but I could certainly see something where we force the candidates to have something that authenticates video. You know, it's hard to authenticate a negative, but it's easier to say, okay, this is real. You know, yeah. What's the source of something?
Yeah, that's good.
Over the next few years, I could certainly see something more like that.
Yep.
Beyond that, honestly, I'm not sure that all the social media companies are excited about this, but I think that collaborating with them to ensure that there actually are robust policies and algorithms to both identify and limit the spread of manipulated content, I think that's going to be really important, because, you know, in those weeks before the election, if they're not on board, it's going to be a whole lot harder. Promoting ethical AI use, so encouraging AI developers to adhere to ethical guidelines, incorporate watermarks or digital fingerprints. There was just an executive order around AI from the White House in the last week. I think that's a positive step, and I think we'll see more things like that. But that's certainly a positive step in the right direction. And the last point is similar to the first one, which is public service announcements and campaigns to inform AI in politics and what to do about it. So beyond that, and you know, what's next? There's going to continue to be enormous investment in AI, enormous investment in startups. There is enormous investment and competition internationally by nation states. Intense competition between some of the tech giants, the Googles, the OpenAIs, and Microsofts, and others. Interestingly, just in the last few days, X, the company formerly known as Twitter, just announced their own AI engine called Grok. And Elon Musk was very excited to say he's taking all the guardrails off. So any of the things that we were talking about where some of the engines are trying to do a better job of protecting people from themselves with the engines, he's said, we are not going to do that, which is going to be interesting to see how that plays out.
And the CEO and president of OpenAI, Sam Altman, responded with, well, Elon will be Elon. So there is that. We'll see what happens.
And then, you know, as we said, I think we'll see more and more of generative AI as a general purpose tool in many fields, but probably with narrower and narrower corpus of content. Okay. In the interest of time,
I don't think we're going to get through these prompts.
No.
But this was just some examples that we came up with as a candidate or as a voter of things that you could do might be tough to see out there, but gather and summarize backgrounds. We've kind of talked about some of this, right? But I mean, these are just headlines of what could be done.
These are all examples of questions that you could ask ChatGPT or Bard, and it could actually help you in the campaign or voting process.
Chance, you could share your slides with us, and we'll send it out to all those who registered.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Excellent. Thank you.
Questions?
Take some from the chat.
Sure.
We'll give them a turn. A lot of the questions have been already asked and answered. One, when you had all those pictures generated of the faces, just as Amy asked, would this help for creating police images for eyewitness?
Probably.
It's a fun thought, huh?
It is.
It's an interesting thought.
Yeah.
Yeah. Chris asked a question about regulation, how there seems to be, there's regulating going on in the European Union.
Yeah,
But you answered the rest of the question that she asked about in the US, so we'll move on there. A clarification, David wants to know if we want to avoid AI lying to us, we can regulate the corpus. We kind of were going in that direction, but that's a little bit more direct question than.
Yeah, I don't know that regulation is necessarily the answer for AI lying to us. It's not that AI is trying to lie to us. It's that, it is generating something new. And like the example of the citation is a great example where like we ask it for a citation, and if we haven't trained the model that you can't generate a citation, like you have to actually source a citation, like that's a programming problem. You know what I'm saying? Like it's doing what it's been trained to do, which is to generate things. And so it's going and saying, well, this looks like something that other citations look like, so I'm giving you a citation that looks like what other citations look like. And it doesn't know that you don't want a citation that looks like other citations, you want a real citation.
And just so you know, in the chat, there's a lot of right on. Oh, yeah, cool. A lot of comments.
Oh, good.
Great.
So they're impressed. The question, here's one you've answered 100 times. The potential for college essays is huge. And how will professors be able to verify AI from student written essays? Okay, you would just push a button and give us that one.
I have an answer, but go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Here's my thought. So as an instructor, not a professor, but I have been an instructor in many things and so forth. Here's how I do it. I structure the pedagogy of the content in such a way that it's not contingent upon one thing. So if I get an essay, for example, that is out of alignment with test scores or out of alignment with perhaps short answers or something like that, that's a tell, right? And so that's how you can kind of do that. See, it really comes down to your assessment strategy and whatnot more so. Now, that being said, we saw some pretty impressive answers from ChatGPT, right? And so again, focusing on what the student thinks, asking questions around opinions, around that kind of stuff to elaborate on that. So they can gather the data all they want, but if they're not expressing their opinions appropriately, that might be a tell also. There are engines too to do this that are being worked on. I don't have much faith in them because most of them have been pulled and they don't work. But I've been able to fool them myself.
Let me say it a different way. So when I used to teach, I used to have, I want to say it was 75% of my course was in 2 papers. I would probably do that differently now. I would have more of the course grade around something that the students had to do in class. I probably would still have them write papers, but as Matt said, it's really hard to know whether the paper that they were writing was something they were writing or something that ChatGPT was helping them to write. But if that same student then has to fill out a series of questions in class while they're sitting in the room, that's a pretty good indicator. Did they actually learn the content? And that ChatGPT is not going to help them with.
One last question, and then we'll, if we have time, get back to the audience. Sarah asks, at what point will AI with its own thinking process? Oh, no. Well, okay, I was going to end with that one. There are a lot, like, will they rule the world? There's a lot. There's a lot. We can end with a sci-fi question.
Sure.
Okay. I'm assuming. Okay. I lost it. This is what Sarah asks. Can AI be trained to be intentionally misleading? I mean, we talked about bias, which is in there, but actually trained to be misleading.
The answer to that is sure. So in most cases, we don't know exactly how the engines are being trained. That's the sort of the secret sauce of the OpenAI or Bard. There's a lot of speculation that OpenAI, in addition to using computer algorithms, is actually using human beings to look at a lot of answers and say, okay, is that right? Is that good? But they're doing a lot to help the model to learn. Could you do something malicious to a model? Sure, you could. I don't think most of the mainstream models have any reason to do that, but someone could. And candidly, one of the things that is interesting about all of this is you don't really know what's going on under the covers. And some of these models, it's very interesting how they seem to get better and then they get worse. And if you look online, you'll see people speculating a lot about, wait a minute, I was getting much better answers from model XYZ last month than I'm getting this month. What changed? And no one really knows, but someone might have tuned the model a little bit or applied some new guardrails. And doing that sometimes results in interesting results because it is a somewhat inexact science.
Good question here.
I guess I'm a realist. Now, a few years ago, Congress had some hearings about whether or not Section 230, or part of the hearing was whether that should be changed to really hold social media companies liable when misinformation is spread. This, to me, seems to make it all the more important. And is there any sense that our legislature is going to have the backbone to enforce some sort of mechanism to really punish these companies when things go awry, demonstrably awry?
I think that question is getting into a realm that I don't know that I'm qualified to answer.
Well, I know I'm not qualified to answer it, but I would say that people do things that are in their own best interest. And so how do we work to make it in their best interest to make the right decision? That's how I would answer it, right? We may not have the right people there now that would do that, but maybe we need to look at that as a qualification for the future.
Traditionally, in the African American community, a week or two before an election, a really good candidate all of a sudden will get a bunch of negative things put out against them. How quickly, if it's AI, could it be turned around, if turned around at all?
That's a great question. I think I'm a firm believer in the fact that it is a tool. And a tool could be used for good or for bad, depending upon what the intent of the person using the tool is, right? The tool itself is not bad or good. It just is a tool. So with that said, I think that the AI could be used in that fashion if somebody wanted to do that, right? To help refute those things in a very quick manner. If you look at the history of when these things have happened, I think sometimes what you've got is you have some spin doctors in there who are saying, don't respond because that'll only amplify it, those kinds of things. And so you don't see those responses. But with AI, perhaps being able to fact check or being able to enable that kind of stuff, it might help with that significantly.
Quick question for you guys. Have social media platforms released any information or made comments on regulatory tools that they can embed in their software to catch generative AI content? And do you guys know why or why not like they would use something like that?
So that's another great question. The only thing I know is based on a Frontline episode I watched a couple weeks ago. So if you look back, there's a Frontline episode about Twitter. Okay. And in there, they're interviewing who was the person in charge of creating those guardrails within Twitter. So each one of the social media companies has somebody, because of that meeting with Congress, to help put those guardrails in place. Right now, obviously, because of the organizational hierarchy and things like that can be influenced, right? And that's what the whole thing was about. So I know that there's active attempts to make sure that they have something to do that, but they're more focusing it, I would say, on misinformation rather than specifically around AI.
And I think that goes back to the fact that it is easier for them to focus on misinformation. What is inaccurate, what is misleading, what is misinformation, than what is generated by AI. It's really hard right now to know what was generated by AI. It's not like we can just run a computer program and say, oh, that's a real video and that was AI generated. In many cases, it's just not that easy to tell. Even OpenAI, for a while, had a tool that they were bringing to the market to look at a piece of content and say, did this come from ChatGPT? And they withdrew it because it wasn't reliable. Like they couldn't detect their own, whether it was coming from them. So that gives you some idea of just how hard it is to do.
Yeah. So first of all, I want to close the loop. It was real. I learned it from Naomi Klein's book, Doppelganger. Highly recommend everyone to read. And it happened in South Korea in 2022. Okay. So it's been over a year now. But my question to you was, as somebody mentioned, it looks like generative AI is bringing the chickens home to roost, right? So to speak, because some of these nationed issues that haven't been addressed in decades are amplified exponentially with this technology. So in addition to Section 230 issue, there's also an issue of privacy. A lot of these models are trained on data that was never vetted for consent from people who generated it. People cannot withdraw that consent. Their personas, synthetic, like I'm not Sarah Silverman, so I cannot be like, hey, I have copyrighted content, I want to withdraw it. I have no recourse. So it seems like maybe there also needs to be a conversation about privacy laws and finally actually putting some kind of teeth into policy in the United States around that issue.
Fair enough.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
You should run for office.
Last question, and then we'll hear about the robot overlords.
Got it. Okay.
So we know that Google keeps track of search requests, histories. Is the creators of these engines, they get the questions, the prompts in, and they know what's come into them. They know the IP address of where it came from, but not necessarily who. And they know what they put back out. Mm-hmm. Is that being retained? Is it available to help dispute resolution? Is the Internet Archive scooping lots of stuff up that likewise could be retained and available to resolve some of these sourcing questions?
So that's a really great question. And it's one that Matt and I spend a lot of time talking with people at the university about, because what we've shown you are mostly short prompts, right? They're easy little questions, but you can actually provide very long, detailed prompts that are, here's a page full of information, or here's 20 pages of information, summarize it. Compare and contrast 2 research papers, compare and contrast and summarize 20 research papers, or all sorts of information. And in doing that, all that information is getting ingested into the engine. And potentially, depending on what the terms of service are for each of these engines, that may be used to teach the model. That content might be available in other responses. So it depends a lot on, is this a publicly available engine? Are you paying for it? Is this an enterprise class engine where there are terms of service and security and privacy? Like as a as an organization, we can also buy versions of some of these engines where all the content is encrypted and it doesn't leave our little version of the engine. That's not always the case for some of these public free versions.
Very true. Last question. Microphone. You want to answer it? You tell me, say it, and I'll. What is the question? Like, when is the singularity? Is that what it is?
I'm sorry, Jeremy. I'm terribly sorry. There are various versions of this, but I will give you the very, very first one, which was, oh, sorry. I thought I had it right here. When will our robot overlords take over?
So
that's one version.
I would recommend asking ChatGPT that question first. But second, I think there was a AI expert, and there's many people who said this, that I think it's within 10 years that it will become sentient, whatever that means. That's also, think about people like to get headlines and like bravado. So think of it that way. And there's also an assumption that that's a bad thing. So we'll just throw that out there, right?
I don't spend too much time worrying about Terminator and Skynet.
No.
I will say, like, I am and Matt said this earlier, I think Matt and I are generally optimists about this, but I do view it as any tool. It is a tool. It can be used for good or it can be used for bad. And I really I absolutely do see positives, both for candidates as well as voters. But I also think there's a really important education component with the electorate, because there's no question that there are these tools that can be used for not so good things. And I think we'll see some of that over the next few years.
So our work is never done. League of Women Voters.
All right. Well, I think that was a great way to sort of close about the importance of, viewing things as tools, and that, we can work on these things for the good or for the bad. And, I think as leader of one of the orgs that is working in this space, I invite everyone who's, interested in this to sort of keep the conversation going. I know I'm very excited to sort of keep getting updates from our speakers and from, other people in this space. If people are interested, Illinois does have a task force that that is investigating sort of what AI can look like. The chair is Senator Robert Peters and Representative Abdel-Nasser Rashid. And so it's still in sort of the early stages of development. I'm sure you guys are following what is happening with the AI task force. I know I am, but there's also something to pay attention to, that the state of Illinois is looking at this. So that is something, on the advocacy and education side, we can, all be watching as well. But I want to just take a moment to thank our speakers. This was incredibly informative and spooky at times. I still can't get over your whole opening speech and then dropping the bombshell that it was written with AI. I'm still blown away by that. And it means I have a lot of work to do too, because I don't think I'm the best speechwriter too. So maybe some ideas in the future. So thank you so much for taking time, and thank you to everyone on Zoom and in person. We did record this, so and the PowerPoint is going to be made available. So stay tuned for that, and definitely share the links to those with everyone. We have an election coming up in March, the primary, and we also have the general election next November. So lots of opportunities to sort of really be paying attention to what is happening. And I encourage everyone, to get out there and also educate as well. So thank you so much for taking your time, and have a great rest of your night.